Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Ready to get into it today?
Absolutely. Always ready to dive in.
Awesome. So today, we're going deep into something super important for anyone who wants to get how India works, especially if you're, prepping for the UPSC exam. We're talking interstate relations.
Yeah, it's one of those things that might sound kind of dry at first.
Like, oh no, constitutional law, right?
Exactly. Haha. But I promise it's way more exciting than it sounds. We're talking power dynamics, cooperation, sometimes even conflicts between states.
It's like the behind-the-scenes drama of how India, with all its diversity, manages to function as one nation. And we're not just skimming the surface here, we're going deep, unearthing those little-known facts, those aha moments.
Exactly. Those things that make this topic actually come alive, whether you're aiming for those top UPSC scores or just want to be a more informed citizen.
Right. Like informed citizen, that's important too. So where do we even begin with something as big as interstate relations?
Well, I think Article 1 of the Constitution is a great place to start. It's the one that declares India as a union of states. Super fundamental.
Okay. Article 1, Union of States. Sounds pretty straightforward, but I have a feeling there's more to it than meets the eye, right?
You got it. You see, a lot of federal systems out there, the states, they existed before they decided to come together.
Oh, interesting.
But in India, it was the other way around. The states were actually formed after independence, and a lot of times those boundaries were drawn based on things like language and culture.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. So that makes cooperation between the states, way more crucial, right?
Absolutely. Think of it this way. It's like trying to build a house starting with the roof. You really got to make sure those states work together from the ground up.
Makes total sense. So cooperation is not just some nice idea, it's baked into how India works on a really fundamental level.
Exactly. Now, when we talk about this whole cooperation thing, one of the biggest issues historically has been water.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Think about it. India's got tons of rivers, and a lot of them flow through multiple states. So naturally, there are going to be disputes over who gets how much water.
Yeah, and you know what always comes to mind for me? The Kaveri River dispute. Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, they've been battling it out for decades. It's always in the news. I'm sure a lot of our listeners know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, for sure. It's probably one of the most well-known examples out there.
Yeah.
And it really shows how complex these things can get. But here's something that might surprise you. Article 262, the one specifically about resolving these water disputes, well, it actually takes them out of the regular court system.
Wait, really? Why is that?
Well, think about it. Resolving a water dispute, it's not just about knowing the law. You got to consider the environmental impacts, the economic needs of each state, the social implications. It's a lot. A regular court, they might not have the expertise for all that.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about what's legally right, but finding solutions that are practical, something that will actually work for everyone involved.
Yeah. Exactly. And, speaking of which, the Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal, the one mentioned in our source material, that's a perfect example of this specialized approach. It's not just any court handling this.
I see. So there are these specific bodies set up just for these kinds of disputes? Makes sense. But interstate relations can't always be about putting out fires, right? There's got to be more to it.
You're absolutely right. It's also about working together proactively, before things escalate.
Which leads us to Article 263 and the Interstate Council. I'm guessing that's what's next.
Bingo. So this council was established back in 1990, and it basically acts like a platform, a place for states to not just settle disputes, but to actually coordinate their policies, work together to find solutions.
Okay, so it's like a forum for proactive problem solving, not just reacting when things go wrong.
Yeah.
I like that. But how does it actually work? Do all states have an equal say? I mean, it could get pretty chaotic, right?
Right. Well, the Interstate Council is designed in a way that tries to keep things balanced. So you've got union ministers representing the central government, and then you've got chief ministers from every single state.
So that's how they make sure everyone's voice is heard. Smart. Especially since, some people are worried about the central government becoming too powerful. So this way it's more of a dialogue.
That's the idea. It's the recognition that a strong India, it needs strong states that can actually work together. It's all connected.
I'm with you on that. All right, so we've talked about resolving disputes. We've talked about this proactive collaboration. What else is crucial when it comes to interstate relations? What else should our listeners know about?
Well, let's say, hypothetically, you decide to move from one state to another.
Okay, yeah.
Let's say you get married in, I don't know, Kerala.
Yeah.
Beautiful place, right? And then for whatever reason, life takes you, you relocate to Rajasthan.
Okay, I'm following.
What happens to that marriage certificate? Is it still valid in Rajasthan?
That's a good question. I never really thought about it. I guess I just assumed it would be.
Right. It seems obvious, but when you think about it, India has so many different states, each with their own, systems and laws.
It could get complicated, yeah.
Exactly. And that's where this really cool thing comes in. Article 261, it's called, and get ready for it, full faith and credit. Sounds kind of formal, but what it basically means is that any official act, record, judicial proceeding from one state, it's recognized in every other state.
Oh, I see. So my Kerala marriage certificate, it's good in Rajasthan, it's good in, I don't know, Assam, it's good everywhere.
Exactly. Your driver's license, your educational degrees, all that stuff. It's like the glue that holds the legal system together across all those state lines.
That's actually super important. I never really thought about it that way. Can you imagine if you had to, revalidate all your documents every time you moved?
Oh, it would be a nightmare, wouldn't it? But there's actually a really interesting nuance here. So civil judgments, like those related to contracts or property, those are enforceable across all of India.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But, and here's the thing, criminal judgments, those aren't.
Wait, really? So if someone, gets convicted of a crime in one state, they could just move to another and avoid punishment?
It's not quite that simple. There are procedures for extradition and cooperation between law enforcement, but it's definitely more complex in civil matters, something for our, aspiring UPSC officers to keep in mind.
Yeah, wow, good point. It's crazy how these things that seem kind of basic on the surface can have such big implications,
Absolutely. And speaking of implications, let's shift gears a bit and talk about interstate trade.
Trade between the states, yeah.
This is covered under Articles 301 to 307. And this is where things get really interesting, especially when we talk about, the economics of it all.
Okay, this sounds like a whole other can of worms.
Kinda, haha. So the Constitution, it's got this goal, right? To promote free trade across state borders. Basically create one big unified market.
Right. That makes sense. A unified market would be good for everyone, right?
Right.
More business, more economic growth.
In theory, yes. But in reality, it gets a little tricky because each state, naturally, they have their own interests to protect.
Like what?
Well, they might want to support their own local industries, right? Or they might need to generate revenue through taxes on goods coming in from other states.
Ah, yeah, I can see how that could create some tension. So how do you balance, the need for a unified economy for the whole country with the needs of individual states?
Good question. So Article 301, it guarantees freedom of trade, where it sounds pretty absolute. But then the articles that come after, they allow for what they call reasonable restrictions.
Reasonable restrictions. What does that even mean?
It means things get complicated. So for example, a state could say, hey, we need to impose some taxes on goods coming in from another state. But they have to justify it. They have to say it's for the public good, like maybe to protect public health or safety.
But who decides what's reasonable and what's not? Seems like that could be a recipe for, constant arguments.
You're telling me, and this is where the courts come in. They have to interpret these provisions and settle disputes over whether a restriction is legit or if a state is just being unfair.
Ah, so it's not just about what's written in the Constitution, it's about how it's interpreted and applied in real-life situations.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just the Constitution itself, right? There's more to this whole cooperation thing. Remember those zonal councils?
Oh, right. We talked about them briefly before.
Yeah.
The ones set up under the States Reorganization Act, not directly from the Constitution.
You got it.
So.
And if you look at Table 15.2 in our source material, it lists all the different zonal headquarters across India. You've got New Delhi, Allahabad, Kolkata, Mumbai, Chennai. It's a pretty big deal.
It's like they're spread out across the whole country working on these regional collaborations.
Exactly. And what's interesting about these councils, they're not enforcing laws or dictating policies.
So what do they do?
Think of it more like a forum. A place where states can get together, talk things out, coordinate, find solutions to problems they're all facing.
Sounds pretty practical.
Yeah.
But do they actually have any power? Can they actually get things done?
Well, their power comes from their ability to build consensus. They can't force states to do anything, but they can help them find common ground.
Right. So it's more about persuasion and cooperation.
Right.
Makes sense. Now, I remember we were talking about how different regions have, different needs, different challenges.
Right. And there's this one region in particular, the Northeast. It's kind of a special case.
Yeah, the Northeast. It's always seemed a bit different from the rest of India, politically and geographically.
Exactly. And that's why we have the Northeastern Council, or